All right, well, good afternoon. You can see that I already graduated from the CRAP program. It's a pretty catchy title. Thank you, Dr. Philindrum. So this is the first of kind of a talk I've given. Mostly gives talks to large groups of scientists and students. So bear with me. I'll try to walk you to the other side of what causes your pain and my pain. I'm actually in a lot of pain. I dislocated my rotator cuff and yeah, going some serious pain. So we're all here to talk about pain, absolutely, right? And learn how we can avoid it. Unfortunately, that's a hard thing. Most of us will inevitably suffer from pain. So I wanted to walk you through the other side of the equation. In developing a drug for pain, there's a lot of things that happen that have to happen before they can come to you, right? So sort of that's what I want to step back and give you an idea of. There's lots of things that we are doing as scientists, both at the clinical stage that Dr. Philindrum talked about and on the preclinical stage. Now, what I'm working with are not people, they're animals, but it's necessary. I'm not out there torturing animals. I can assure you it is absolutely critical and essential to get the drugs to you for me and people like myself to do that work. Okay, so this is the center that just started. They're a 12, 13-year-old center. We're a baby center. I had my first symposium to inaugurate the center just this March. So we're just up and running. So hopefully we'll do this again, and in years we will be able to give you some better news with new drugs for pain that you and I can use. Just acknowledge the partners that we have at the University of Florida. We are very fortunate to work with the McKnight Brain Institute, where my lab and the center is housed, as well as folks across campus, including the clinical center run by Dr. Philindrum. We also are working on a very difficult pain problem. Hopefully none of you have it, but if you do, I'm happy to talk to you about it after the session, which is orofacial pain, trigeminal neuralgia. It's one of the most difficult pain conditions you can ever imagine, and it's almost impossible to treat with drugs. It's absolutely devastating. We're fortunate to work with the foundation for this pain phenomena here in Gainesville. So that's something we can talk about if you're interested. Okay, well, Dr. Philindrum gave a wonderful overview of pain, the genetics of pain, the varying disparity, different from person to person. And I will tell you that this is becoming a huge problem. It's always been a big problem, right? Pain outnumbers anything that we study. If you have cancer, if you have diabetes, if you have heart disease, any and every one of them component, a common denominator there is pain. Whether you're a billionaire or a poor person or in between, the common denominator is always pain. It really is. So this is something of epidemic that's not hidden anymore. It's really something that's out there, and we need a revolution. We need something to break through. We need to figure out how to solve pain. And it's a big, big problem, and it's a big, difficult task. Dr. Philindrum alluded to this already a little bit, but I'll tell you again that a quarter of us in our lifetimes will suffer from pain. The problem is, for a lot of us have acute pain, and then sometimes it becomes chronic. And that transition is operationally defined by healthcare, the way the system works, by physicians. There's some time that has to elapse before something is classified as chronic pain. Unfortunately, when you go to your physicians, you'll see that for you to be diagnosed, for some people to be diagnosed with chronic pain, it can take up to 7 years. That is unacceptable. That is such a long lag in time for somebody to realize that, or to be labeled as chronic pain. Meanwhile, you as a person is living with that chronic pain for those 7 or 8 years. And even then, if you are one of those people that has eventually been labeled as somebody with chronic pain, you will still need many different medications. Only 1 in 8 people have adequate care even at that point. So you can see it's a very complicated problem. Of course, it's costly. It affects not just yourselves, but family members, the caregivers. So it's a devastating phenomenon that is not just prevalent in the US, but worldwide. And here is why this is such a big problem. It's a busy slide. I'll walk you through it. So there is very good regulatory guidance. If you go to a physician for a handful of conditions, okay, you have post-herpetic neuralgia or you have back pain, you're going to go through this, you get this treatment. So there's about 8 to 10 conditions diagrammed on the top left for which there is some guidance to physicians in how to treat that pain as best as they can. Of course, as Dr. Philogem said, that will be variable depending on patient to patient. But as with anything in life, that's not the simple picture, right? It's always more complicated. The bottom left really is what pain is all about. It is a constellation of diseases. Just like cancer is not just one cancer, it's many different kinds of cancer. One pain is not the same as, your pain is not the same as my pain. It is absolutely different. But what happens is they all get lumped into one. And that's a problem because that in itself defies solutions. We can't come up with solutions, but your pain is different from mine, but we treat it the same. So that's a big problem. And that's really the problem that we're dealing with. That pain is a massive landscape. And the reason it's such a massive landscape is diagrammed on the right side with the human body. And you can see that almost every element of your being is being affected. You have your arms and legs. You have pain because of conditions in your blood, your joints, your nerves that conduct the signaling of pain, the bones, the hand and feet, the head. It's a system-wide problem. And you can easily appreciate the difficulty in solving something like this, right? And the bad news began early. I just continue with the bad news. It's a difficult problem. It's very challenging to come up with solutions to solve something that affects all aspects of your body. So back in 2016, President Biden and before, they had a think tank of people and cancer rates were going up, and they thought, okay, well, we got to do something about this. And they had this initiative called the Cancer Moonshot. It was a shot in the dark to get a lot of people together that were cancer experts to really come up with ideas how to solve the issue of cancer. And cancer rates are decreasing for some types of cancer, getting better. Treatments are getting better and better. And that was because of a concerted effort by the US government, by the health department, to focus their energy to get to that mission of reducing cancer death by half in 25 years. So it's hopefully getting and moving in the right trajectory. A similar moonshot-like event happened in about 2018 under President Trump. And the idea there was that there was a lot of problems because of the opioid overdose crisis. It was escalating. And the think tanks, the powers that be, scientists got together at the National Institutes of Health and created this program called Helping to End Addiction Long-Term, or HEAL, the HEAL Initiative. It was a shot of about $1 billion infusion to get pain research, to really bolster pain research, to put a real focus on pain. Because as you can appreciate, as Dr. Philogem was saying, pain cuts across all diseases. And yet, at the National Institutes of Health, which funds all the scientific research related to health, there is no pain institute. And that's shocking. It's absolutely shocking. It undercuts everything, but there's no pain institute. So this was the response or the solution that was proposed. And since 2018, there has been a constant exposure to pain, or a really explosion of pain research that is hopefully going to bear some promise. And at the end, I'll tell you a couple of wins that have resulted because of programs like this. So why did they put money into this research? Now, this is not about pain, but I just want to use this as an example of why basic science is so critical here. How many in this audience take statins? I do. Right. So on the left side, so that there's a 30, 50, maybe 60 years of research that has gone into figuring out all the pathways that change your cholesterol, metabolize your cholesterol, high cholesterol, low cholesterol, HDL, LDL. And those studies over the course of 50, 60 years led to the development of statins. Now, they're not the best drugs. I take them, I get a lot of pain from it, so I use a different one. But the point is, that all resulted from an influx of research on the cardiovascular complication of cholesterol, right? So that's one example. In the middle, you have an example of cystic fibrosis. I don't know if you know what that is. I'm sure you do. Cystic fibrosis, if I can describe it in a very simple manner, is essentially the lungs fill up. You're drowning in your own lungs. And the reason for that, really crazy genetics, is just a single protein that normally has to sit in the membrane, but it doesn't get to the membrane because it has a simple mutation that prevents it from getting to the membrane. Now, when I was a Ph.D. student at the University of Toronto in Canada, I had one of my professors who was working on this particular protein. And her lab pioneered this idea. What if we could just rescue this deficit, take this protein that's supposed to be up here, but it gets trapped inside? What if we can boost or get it to where it needs to go? So what they did was use temperature, they used glycerol, and they finally found a small molecule to get that protein. Even 5% of that protein that's trapped inside, even 5% rescue was enough to cure the person. Amazing, amazing. So another example of using critical basic research, translating it from test tubes and mice and rats into humans. And this is actually now being used in humans. A third example is Gleevec. It's a cancer drug, anti-cancer drug, and it is being used to cure all kinds of cancer or to block some kind of cancer. So the reason I bring up these three, perhaps unrelated to pain examples, are because it is critical for basic research to be done to figure out how to develop and how to cure pain. So that's really why I use these examples. Now, why do we need to do this? As Dr. Fillingham said, there are mechanisms in your body that sense the pain, that amplify the pain, and then maybe some mechanisms that resolve the pain. And as he very elegantly pointed out, they're all different in all of us. All of us. We behave differently, they act differently. But this captures that sort of phenomena. So on the left side is this sort of a cartoon that shows you that at some point, pain is sensed by the body, whether it's because of a cut or some sort of a thermal stimulus, or even chili pepper. You know, you work with hot pepper, and if you accidentally put it in your eye or a wound, if you have an open cut, it's painful. So all of that pain is sensed by these sort of sensors. These are proteins that basically sense and open and then start a relay of signaling that leads to the pain pathway and amplification of pain. That's what pain's about. This is how pain happens. So something is causing an injury or a disease that has now changed that signaling so that instead of reacting to it in a muted fashion, you react very quickly. You're sensitized to it. And that is amplifying the pain that you will feel. And so that signal is carried from the extremities or whatever you have a cut or some sort of injury, all the way through into your spinal cord. And from there, it migrates all up into your brain. And so you can appreciate the problem already. So where do I stop the pain? Here, or in the brain? Or all of them? Or two of them? Where do I start it? Where do I stop it? So this is a big problem, and this is sort of is why we need to understand what are some of the major players that contribute to the genesis of pain. So maybe we can stop them at the very outset, or if that's not doable because this guy looks very much like this guy and the other guy looks like the other guy, so how do we control for just some random effect? Or so if we can't do that, perhaps we can control it at the level of the spinal cord, spinal modulation or something, spinal cord stimulator, or in the brain. Well, opioids do that. It basically disconnects you from the pain. You don't feel pain because you don't care, right? So, and that has its own problems, and we'll get into that. So you can see, as I just said, there's a challenge. Where do you begin? And so we at CAPToR and labs across the University of Florida and across the US are working on different aspects of this, trying to figure out what are the triggers, what triggers lead to what kind of pathways, and if we can isolate those, we can stop them. We can understand, deep dive into them, and figure out how to block them. And same thing with pathways in the spinal cord as well. So what is the status quo for pain research right now? Well, it's sort of cartooned up here. We understand the mechanism, by which I mean exactly the proteins, the pathways, how your nerves talk to each other. That's critical. We need to understand those at a very deep level in order to do something about interfering with them to stop pain or to dull pain. There are ways, and Dr. Fillingham talked a little bit about assessment tools, the biopsychosocial model of what pain is all about, moving that into therapy, and nowadays the big words are, the AI, artificial intelligence, machine learning. All that is going to factor into more and more as we learn more of how to use that. But there are a lot of limitations. I know I don't want to be, the Debbie Downer here, but it really is, there's lots of problems here that we haven't overcome yet. And that's why we don't have a drug for every pain condition, right? Let's face it. So there's weak evidence at the preclinical level, perhaps, which is largely because we are not mice, we are not rats, but most of the research that's done, even in my lab, is done on these rodents, sometimes on larger animals, but largely on rodents. We cannot test humans until we know that drugs are safe to be used in humans. That's a fair point. I don't want to test anything on me that it's not safe. So that's very important, but that in itself is a problem because we are not rats. Rats are not us. So I can ask you, and you can articulate if you have pain. How do I ask an animal what they're feeling? So there's an inherent disconnect. And there's ways to get around it. We do that. But this is the problem. Big data starting to accumulate. We're all starting to gather massive amounts of data. Perhaps we can all put it together into one big data center and start to analyze and see what's connected to what and figure out ways to use that data to our advantage. And the NIH is mandating that we deposit all the data that we accumulate from all the labs across the US so machine learning and AI tools can be used to figure out. Because there's a lot of stuff going on. And so one lab says something else, my lab says something else. Who do we believe? Who's right? Even this happens even in clinical trials. A dose of this caused pain relief, but another group finds, well, not really. So what do you do? So there's always that. We need to figure out how to translate things better from research ideas into practice. That is a huge sort of a bridge that we have to cross. And additional mechanisms. We're always uncovering new and new mechanisms, particularly in the microbiomes, the gut microbiota. That's really the big thing these days. How can we make this better? Well, there's a big push to move away from animal models. And while I don't support that, I do see the utility of some of these tools. We can use organoids. We can take artificially grown cells that can not just look like cells in a dish, but actually look like organs that can sort of simulate some of the body parts, but not really, right? That's not, it's a small piece of the entire body. It's not the organism itself. So that's tough. I don't think it's going to work either. Organs on a chip, not too big fan of that either. And all kinds of machine learning and AI-based approaches. And the other big problem is, so we talked about statins. Some of us raised our hands, we use statins. Why do we get to use a statin? Because in our blood, it was found that the LDL or HDL was affected, right? So why is that? Because there's a beautiful biomarker. So there is something that is predictive of cardiovascular related effects, and that's why you got on a statin. What's the biomarker for pain? Anybody? There is none. There are no biomarkers for pain. Now that would be a unicorn. That would be amazing to have a biomarker for pain. If we had one, we could predict in this table or this table, well, you have the biomarker that's up, well, you're going to be in pain. You don't, you won't be in pain. Wonderful. But wouldn't it be amazing if we could do that? So we need to figure out how to develop something that's predictive of whether a drug will work, whether this person will develop pain or not. So that's something that's also missing. And there are new things that are coming along in the pipeline, immuno-based therapies that are being used. There are biomaterials, particularly for joint-based diseases, that perhaps stabilize them, perhaps then allow regrowth and regeneration, rejuvenation. So those are underway. Those could be useful. We can learn from nature. I'll give you examples of that in a minute. And the other thing is, as Dr. Fillingham was saying, pain is biopsychosocial, which means it's affecting many components and many facets of your body to produce that pain. But so if we flip that on its side, we should also use a multitude of these kind of approaches to come and attack pain so we can stop it. So that's very important. All right, let's get back to the opioid. Why did we get into this mess? Why are we, all of a sudden, why is there so much scrutiny and focus on pain research and our real collective need to develop something for it? It was because of the opioid crisis. Really, about 100,000 Americans were dying every year from opioid overdose or misuse, whether it's because of prescribed or illicit use. And this was, 30% of patients were prescribed pain for misuse, and over 3 million people developed this opioid use disorder. It was devastating. And you all know what opioids do. They are very dissociative. They do work in an acute pain setting, but for chronic pain, they have no significant value at all. So that's really where this kind of thinking led to the opioid crisis. So pain has been here since eternity. I'm afraid to say this, but I think it'll stay here for a long time, well after we're all gone. It's a fact of life. And so even as early as 1800s, morphine was extracted. A lot of us take aspirin. I took a couple before I started this because my arm's hurting. It's just hurting. So 1897, wow. Behavior therapy for pain. We were beginning to now really understand the mechanisms of pain. So Melzack, the famous scientist, started to think about what controls pain, and they developed a gate control theory of pain. Spinal cord stimulation started to happen. Then you have intrathecal delivery, so you have restricted space spinally, so you can give pain drugs locally. The opioid receptors were discovered. This is very, very important discovery. Application of AI things, where imaging techniques started to figure out what pain is in the brain. They used MRI neuroimaging to find that if you have a person in pain versus not, you have different areas of the brain activated. In 1999, they discovered a protein that is an ion, there's a channel which about 4 years ago led to the discovery for two scientists, the winning of the Nobel Prize. And this is the receptor for the chili peppers. So it is the capsaicin receptor, and they discovered both this and a receptor for touch, very important critically, right? Touch and chili pepper is very, very critical. So these two folks, David Julius and Artem Pardapudian, won the Nobel Prize in 2021 for that discovery. Moving on forward, people have started to use monoclonal therapies, antibody therapies for pain. Gene therapy is starting to be touted for pain. And I strongly believe that this could be a very important therapeutic intervention for some people. It's going to be restricted, but for some people it could be useful. They're starting to use stem cell derived cells for pain. And now we're starting to map out all kinds of brain regions that are critical for pain. And the Human Brain Atlas has been exquisitely fine mapped now to give an idea of what potentially could be biomarkers. Jury's still out on that. You can see again, it's very complicated. There are many things that can modulate your level of pain. Genetics is one of them. There are mutations in genes. I'll talk about one that my lab works on later. There are things that happen to proteins that make them more excitable, more amplified in a way that they'll contribute more to pain signaling. There are the gut microbiota. This is a huge field that's really being explored now that's causing and could be used as a way to mitigate pain. Inflammation obviously is a very important part of pain. Signaling, the pathways, the mechanistic understanding really is the crux of how we're going to solve this, in my opinion. Some of the current therapies that are being used, non-opioids, aspirin, NSAIDs, opiates, of course, are going to be here for better or worse. Biopsychosocial model predicts that or says that psychological therapies, exercise therapies, as Dr. Fillingham said, are going to be critical in all of this. Acupuncture. I just had acupuncture done yesterday. It's great. I love it. It works pretty well. It doesn't last very long, but it does work. So I've had that done recently. Neuromodulation, brain-computer interfaces, microbial intervention. That's a new one. The emerging ones I told you a little bit about. Gene therapy, I think, is going to be big, hopefully in the next few years. Monoclonal antibodies have been developed. Stem cell therapies are also on the rise. So people are thinking of many, many different ways to come up with ways to cure pain or to block pain. So as I said, we started this center about at the end of March. We had our first big event to inaugurate the center. We had some great speakers, including Dr. Fillingham. And the idea is really to sort of spread across the University of Florida and tap into the expertise that is available to collectively pursue the goal of solving pain and seizing control over pain through scientific advancement. And so the College of Pharmacy, College of Dentistry, Engineering, the Price Center, McKnight Brain Institute, the Addiction and Care Center, Scripps out in Jupiter, they all have come together to help us form this center in order to advance some of the discoveries in labs like mine to folks across the US. So the idea and our vision is to really pioneer non-addictive, right? So what we are trying to do is develop non-opioid, non-addictive therapies that could be used in humans. I'll give you a very quick glimpse of, and I'll wrap up in the next 6 minutes, glimpse of some of the things that people are doing across the labs at the University of Florida. In the College of Pharmacy, we have Dr. McCurdy, who's working on this thing called kratom. Maybe some of you have heard of this. It is a medicinal compound from this leaf that grows in Eastern Asia, and it has basically pain relieving properties. And his lab has pioneered efforts to figure out exactly which part of that tree leaf's component is important for pain relief. So at some point, maybe we'll get him to come give a talk here. It would be really useful. Along with him, Satya is in fact looking at natural products from the agriculture and life sciences at the University of Florida, trying to tap into natural remedies for pain. My lab works across a swath of things, very protein-based, very drug discovery oriented, try to figure out pathways and then dissect them. But I will not talk about that. I'll talk about this little cool thing over here with my friend Mohab Ibrahim out of Arizona. We're wearing green light glasses. Okay, so why are we doing that? Thought to look cool. Well, maybe. But the reason here is we discovered, or he discovered, that green light is pain relieving. Now you probably roll your heads or roll your eyes and say, what? No, it doesn't work. Well, light therapy has been used in Scandinavian countries for a long time. I grew up in Toronto, very cold, pretty much no sun during the winter months, really sad, depressing. Also in Scandinavian countries, and blue light they use all the time to have as sort of an anti-depression, mood relieving kind of thing, right? So what we did here with him is take rats and put them in a box with different kinds of light. So one box was blue light, one box yellow light, red light, orange light, and green light. Left them in for about, let's say, 3 hours a day for 3-4 days. Now, the light level is way less than what we have here. This is probably 50 to 100,000 lux intensity of light. We left these rats to about maybe 10 lux, so very low amount of light. Came back on the 4th or 5th day, took the rats out, and we can assess pain in a rat. We can. How do we do it? You poke them, pokey poke, and if the animal's in no pain, it's going to withstand a lot of poking, right? But if it's in pain, you touch it a little bit and it withdraws its paw. So that's sort of a surrogate measure of pain. Or you can do heat. So it won't burn them. You have a laser that's underneath their paw. They'll move around, they'll stop, and you just turn the laser on. At some point, it's going to be painful or discomfort. They'll remove their paw. That's when we figure out, okay, that's a threshold. Believe it or not, the animals exposed to green light, not the other colors, green light, they could withstand their paw until the cutoff time, all the way, 20 seconds, all the way. The rat's in pain, 5, 6, 8 seconds, already off. Green light. So, okay, rats, whatever. He's a physician scientist. So he's interested in animal work, but he's interested in humans. He runs the pain clinic at the University of Arizona. So he said, how do we move this to humans? So he recruited 15 women, mostly women, I think, fibromyalgia, and 15 migraineurs. Most of them are women. So I think 14 were women. Gave them green light, go home, take it, and expose yourself to the green light for an hour a day. So you can be cooking, talking to your family members, sitting, no computer, no screens, nothing like that. 1 hour a day. And then record your pain levels, diary and that kind of thing, pain scores, like Dr. Fillinger was talking about the pain scale. And so we gave them this for 10 weeks. When they came back, it was amazing. 14 out of the 15 people in both groups had a 70% reduction in the pain intensity. About half of them stopped taking their meds. I mean, he's a physician, so he can tell them, so don't do that. But they said, no, they're not taking meds. Their sleep quality got better. When you have pain, your sleep's affected, right? Their pain quality got better. So this is a very cool non-pharmacological way of working out things. And if you don't like it, use it as a Christmas decoration or any other favorite holiday. So if you want to know more about that, I'm happy. So I've had so many emails from across the globe as how to use this. I don't make any money out of it, so I'm happy to tell you what to buy. It's like $10 from Amazon, and you can try it. If it doesn't work, again, use it as a decoration, all right? So here's my little non-pharmacological plug for Mohab. But there are other things than drugs. I know everybody wants a drug to cure things, and me neither. I've already taken enough drugs for blood pressure and statins, so no more. So we need to think outside the box. So light, why not? So something to think about. Other labs are doing things to accelerate the pace of research. So this lab works on ways to basically screen for neural activity and how that's affected. And so we're working with them. Dr. Cottle's been working on osteoarthritis and looking at the mechanisms of how neurons are excitable, how the cartilage and the bone tissues is affected in arthritis. Dr. Allen's group here in the Biomedical Engineering College, University of Florida, is an expert at this, using it, coming at it from a very engineering standpoint, developing sophisticated ways to assess this He's part of the Rejoin program. They're doing things even in horses now to translate the findings from rodents into larger animals before we get into humans. So a very big, powerful lab that's running all of this. My wife's group, my wife is also a scientist. She's also the Dean of Innovation and Entrepreneurship at the university. Her lab uses a lot of sophisticated AI-based machine learning tools in the realm of neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's, ALS, Parkinson's, all of which also have components of pain. Believe it or not, the earliest symptom of Parkinson's is pain. It precedes Parkinson's by 6 months. The development of Parkinson's by six or 7 months. So she's working on all kinds of structural-based approaches, flies, mice, and computational methods to develop drugs for pain-related, but also these neurodegenerative diseases. Sorry, last couple of slides. Dr. Martiniabov at Scripps is developing non-addictive small molecules that are non-opioid. And we're very fortunate to work with these folks in Jupiter to expand our capabilities to develop and accelerate the pace of discovery for pain research. My lab works on this cool little protein, the sodium channel, which is the fuse and the firecracker of pain. So this is things coming, the opening of this channel really leads to the signaling of pain. It's absolutely critical. And I'll give you an example of why this is so important, particularly in the last 3 months or so. So amazingly, there was one drug that has been approved in the last 25 years. That's this one. It's a tongue twister. Suzetrigine, also known as Journevax. It's been approved recently in February of this year for acute pain. No efficacy in chronic pain, but acute pain. The company Vertex is working on similar compounds for potentially chronic pain. They're trialing it in diabetic neuropathy at this point. And so this came out of all the discovery efforts that labs like mine have done and companies like this that follow and chase the mechanism pathways. So this is the protein that I also work on. My lab is doing it a different way, but these guys approached it and basically developed a molecule that sits on the channel and kind of affects its opening. And when it does that, the fuse never starts. So the firecracker is never ignited, and so the pain is stopped. It's absolutely beautiful. 30, 40, 50 years of basic understanding that led to this discovery. Okay, and that's all I have to say. I work with this wonderful group of people, and thank you for your attention.
All right, I know you guys got some questions out there. I'll do my best to get to all of you.
Sorry.
This is wonderful. You both were fantastic, I have to say. What I'd like to know is how can we get tested locally for pain modulation or thresholds, if that's possible here locally? And also, do you all offer pain management at UF?
Yeah, so for the first question, if you're in one of our studies, you're most likely going to get that kind of testing. I should let you know this is not a clinical test where we can tell you you're sort of normal animal, you need to do some work. So we don't have cutoffs like that. Everything's pretty relative. But so we don't do it clinically or as a service, but we do it as part of our research program. The second question was about pain management. Some of our studies are testing interventions for pain, but that's not treatment, of course, that's research. There is a pain medicine clinic at UF Health. It's up at Spring Hill. Dr. Pascora runs that. You may be familiar with that. There's also Dr. Astorez runs an integrative health clinic, and I know she manages a fair amount of pain. So there are pain management clinics from different departments at UF Health.
And we have some of that information up front, at the front table too, for the pain management in Dr. Astorez's clinic.
Thank you for brilliant lectures, both of you. My question is for Dr. Kanna. Can you comment on what we keep seeing on TV on QC Kinetic, which is that leaf stem cell therapy? How does it work and what's your opinion on it?
Yeah, I've seen a little bit about it. The mesenchymal stem cells of various flavors have been used for different diseases. My take on it is how it works hasn't really been figured out very well. So it's super early in its adoption. I know it's been used for neurodegenerative conditions. There are reports, I was at a recent meeting in Chicago that says that it potentially could be used for trigeminal neuralgia. They inject into the trigeminal ganglia to be able to have these cells replace and rejuvenate nerves and the cells around. And so there may be some cases where it could be very useful, but I would say it's really early stages right now, really early stages. It is being used for patients, absolutely. But what I'm trying to say is that we don't really know exactly how it's relieving the pain. I agree, it is working, but yeah, I'll stop at that because.
Okay, we got another question back here.
Doctor, we were told about something a few years ago. It's called the life vessel. And it was being produced, someone was selling it. You go into like a containment with shine and color, and it was costing how much?
Very expensive.
Very expensive, about $20,000. It's looking up, it's called the life vessel. Now I think it's back out there again.
Wow, that's the thing I was telling you cost like $8.
Yeah, that's what I mean. And one more thing, years ago, we went to a seminar at some restaurant and it came out food, and they were doing STEM research. They said it cured everything. It was kind of a scam, you know. Everybody went to enjoy a good meal, and they wanted to know how many people wanted to be interested. None.
Yeah, you have to be aware of the snakeskin oil. Absolutely, no.
I noticed it maybe the
Oh.
law of funding.
We got a question here, hold on.
You can't hear? Pardon.
Go ahead.
I have long-term chronic back pain. I wanted that green light. Tell me what it's called so I can order it.
I can, Marcia, how can I get that information to you so you can?
You can give it to me, and and if when you registered, if you gave us an email address, I'm going to send everybody a recording of this. So if you wanted some more information about the slides or any other information, they'll have follow-up information. I'll include it in that.
It's always a good. Oh, by the way, just no red light. It's going to cause pain. The red light we found causes pain.
Okay, here we go. Another question.
Doctor, I have two questions. Number one is, in your slide, you presented the pathway of pain all the way from the fingertips down to the spinal cord and go to the brain. How does the pain reliever act? Do they choose the site where is it going to act? The second question is about the pain ladder management. You have mentioned about dependent or reward dependent and tolerance. If you have now a patient who is indicating a terminal cancer in severe pain, how far will you go with the tolerance?
Okay. Sorry, the first question was about the pathways or?
So if you have pain in a fingertip and you take a medication, how does it get there? And does it discriminate? Where does it go? Does it go to your toes as well? I think that's what he's asking. I
see. So the pathway has, the whole thing is the pain circuit. So all of it has to be engaged so the signal cannot just get started and then stop in the spinal cord. It has to go all the way up to the brain. And actually, it also has to descend to close the loop. So when you and I feel that feeling of pain, it's because that signal gets to our brain, there's a descending signal, and that loop is closed. And if that loop gets aggravated or amplified, as Dr. Villeneuve was saying earlier, that's what causes the pain. So, and those sensors I talked about They're all different, but they convey the same. They start the pain differently, but they start and cause the pain to be the same, pretty much. So you may have a cold sensation or a heat sensation, or because of a cut or some chemical. Those will activate different proteins that are the sensors, but they then transduce that signal into those channels I talked about, for which there was a new drug recently released. Those then excite the neurons, which then excite other neurons, and that just gets the ball rolling. So it's a sort of a train that gets started, and that signal is all because of that. So it's all that.
So where does that pain disrupt the flow of that
Yeah,
sensation?
so like treatments, how do they do that? Like that new drug you talked about.
Oh yeah. So that new drug essentially will stop the pain when it starts. So right at the very beginning. So you have the sensor, it activates this, or it starts this sort of, that's what I was saying, the fire and the fuse light and the firecracker. If you don't light the fuse, the firecracker never goes. So if you don't start that, the signals never talk to each other. The signal never is generated. So the neuron is quiet and it's happy, and it's not going to be overactivated. And so it stops it right at the onset, right at the beginning, which is pretty cool, right? Remember I had said you can start it at the periphery, you can stop it at the periphery or the spinal cord or in the brain. Well, they took the approach, let's start it where it starts. Let's stop it where it starts. So that's what they're doing.
And I would add that certain psychological interventions operate on the pain in the brain, right? And so you can do mindfulness meditation and do brain imaging, and you can see that certain brain regions are being turned on by meditation and other pain-related brain regions are being turned off by meditation. So different treatments, you're right, they operate at different points along that pathway that Dr. Khanna talked about.
All right, we got another question right here. Oh, let's go ahead and get this one going, and we'll come back if we have time.
Yeah, well, the first one had to do with the green light, so I'm gonna wait patiently. I have a lot of pain, and pain has been my friend for a while, but I don't take any pharmaceutical stuff. I just tolerate it and massage and meditate, but maybe that green light will help. And number two, this new medication that you're talking about, I am not in the medical field. I have no clue what goes on in your labs and that. But if this medication, is it for any particular pain? Or, I mean, acute pain, but where?
Yeah.
Is it in your knees, is it in your back, in your neck, or is it an overall thing?
So this company, Vertex, that developed this drug, used it for tummy tuck operations, and for there was another bunionectomy. So if you have a really bad bunion, it's very, very painful. So they trialed it and they approved it for those two conditions, but it's used for any kind of chronic pain, so any kind of acute pain is what I'm getting at. Now, that said, as we can all appreciate, there are many options for acute pain, right? That are non-opioid even. As I told you, I took an aspirin, things like that, Aleve. So there are some things. So I think this will add to that panel of drugs for acute pain. The jury's out whether this is going to be useful for chronic pain. The data said it wasn't. Their data that on humans suggested it wasn't.
All right, we got our next question over here.
And one over here.
In your presentation, there was a statement that in 2020, 100,000 Americans died of opioid overdoses. What is the current statistic?
Oh, I'm happy to tell you that it's decreasing. The last statistics, I think, were around the 60,000 mark. It's still a lot, I know, but it is going in the right direction because of the national oversight and the real influx of money and more research into this. And there's been a lot more scrutiny on, unfortunately, on physicians as well. to maybe not prescribe as many opioids. So yeah, I think that's.
Yeah, and so it has decreased, and there's been a transition so that the opioids that seem to be involved in deaths now are much less frequently prescription opioids and more frequently street drugs, synthetic drugs, heroin laced with fentanyl and things like that on the illegal drug market. So we still have a problem, but it may be less of a prescription opioid problem.
Thank you both of you for giving us a great presentation on pain. Everybody in here is suffering from some pain or the other. But my question is, how much does your mind play the influence on your pain?
Yeah, so the first thing I'll say about that is if you're experiencing pain, your pain is real, right? The second thing I'll say about that is no brain, no pain. Okay?
True, very true.
Pain occurs in the brain. Even if you localize it to your back or to your knee, the organ that perceives the pain is the brain. And so it stands to reason that if we can change how the brain is functioning, and we have lots of evidence for this now from brain imaging studies, you can significantly alter the amount of pain that people are experiencing. So what I'm saying is you're not fooling people into thinking they have less pain than they do. You're actually decreasing the amount of pain that they have. So there can be significant brain-based, cognitive, emotional, mental contributions to pain and its treatment.
All right, I got time for one more question here, and the lady in pink back there.
Yes, hi. I actually have several questions, but
Let's get one. We got time for one.
the first one is probably I can answer it in regards to the law and also because of pharmaceutical contributions to research, but y'all haven't mentioned anything about the endocannabinoid system or cannabis.
Yes.
So there is research going on here and elsewhere on cannabinoids. There is a complication because cannabis is still illegal at the federal level, so those of us who do our research with federal money are pretty restricted in what we can research. There is more preclinical evidence that cannabis helps pain a lot than there is clinical evidence. There is some clinical evidence that some forms of cannabis may be helpful for pain, but there are a lot of conflicting studies there. So there is active research ongoing, but for me, the jury's still out on how effective it is clinically and what the right ratio of THC to CBD or all of the many different compounds that make up a cannabis plant.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that's the critical part of it, because there's such a variety of products that are being sold with different amounts of THC, CBD. I've used gummies and only for sleep, so to help sleep, and they work. But it's a different ratio every time. So it really is understudied at this point, and it's heavily regulated. And until the time it becomes accepted across the U.S., I think it's going to be not very much information. But clinically, I don't think there's a lot of evidence suggesting that it's useful so far.
Last question.
Exquisite presentations, thank you very much. You mentioned that women tend to have more pain than men. Could it be because of the musculature, which is not as strong? And also as we age, even small bumps seem to give a lot of pain. And exercise, of course, helps, but there's limitation because once we do just like 10 minutes and then there's pain, if I continue, then it's so intense that I cannot do any exercise for a few days. And taking medication, when one is very susceptible to side effects, how can we manage pain?
Yes, so there are a lot of contributions to why women and men experience pain differently. Some of it may be differences in body size, body fat distribution, those kinds of things. That hasn't been really well researched. That might actually affect sex differences in drug response more than sex differences in pain. There is a lot of evidence that sex hormones influence different aspects of pain processing and can influence pain perception. So estrogen versus testosterone levels and the cycling levels of hormones that women experience during their reproductive years seem to contribute. But there are also psychosocial factors. In many Western societies, it's more acceptable for women to report pain than it is for men. So there's the whole gender role thing. And also women and men appear to cope with pain differently, which may contribute to some of the differences. So it's really a complex question that has many different answers.
All right, I want to thank our speakers today. Let's give them a round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you.